The very next day, early, my father took his camera and went off to the forest. As he got there, he started to have second thoughts. Perhaps hunting down a lion armed only with a camera wasn't such a bright idea. But he was there now, and he was desperate to get evidence of the lion. He looked everywhere, but he couldn't see anything. No signs of lion life at all, until he came to a small stream, and there, in the mud, he saw it. A lion's paw print. Yes, this would do. This would do. He'd take a photograph of the paw print. That should be enough proof to convince everybody that he hadn't been making it all up. But as he bent down to take the photo, he had a most peculiar feeling. He felt like he was being watched. He looked over his shoulders and around, but he couldn't see anything. Had he looked up, however, he would have seen the lion moving stealthily, slowly along the branch, and then it jumped down silently and looked at my father's back as he was bending over to take the picture. My dad looked around, and then he saw it, the lion, and as he did so, it leapt. My father tried to run. He turned to sprint, but there's no way a human being can outrun a lion. And a fraction of a second later, it was on his back. He fell. The camera smashed against a rock and broke. His head hit a rock, and he was out. Darkness, blackness, for 1 second, unconscious. When he came to, the first thing he was aware of was this great weight on his chest. Then he felt something warm and moist on his face, something breathing. He opened his eyes, and there, once again, he was locked, looking into the eyes of the lion. Its paws pinned his shoulder to the ground. The lion moved closer. He felt its warm breath on his face, and then it opened its mouth and he saw its fangs. And then the lion licked him. He felt its rough tongue. The lion licked him again. And then my father heard the lion purr. For a lion is nothing more than a huge cat, and just like a cat, when it's happy, it will purr. Well, this lion seemed to be very happy. It was purring loudly, and then it rolled off my father and sprang to its feet. My dad stood up too, rubbing the back of his head where he'd knocked it on the rock. The lion moved forward and rubbed its head against my father's chest, the same way a cat might rub its head and ears against your shin when it's seeking affection. My father put out a hand and buried it in the lion's mane. Oh, soft and warm. He scratched the lion behind the ear, and it purred. And then my father felt something. A collar around the lion's neck, and at the front a small silver disc, and written on the disc 3 letters, L-E-O, Leo. This lion was somebody's pet, Leo the lion. And then my father had a brilliant, but terrifying idea. He undid his belt buckle. He slid the belt out from his trousers and threaded it through the lion's collar. And he led the lion home. When he got there, he knocked on the kitchen door and opened it. "Hello, Mum, I'm back, and guess what I've got?" His mother was at the sink washing a dish. And when she turned around and saw my dad with the lion behind him, she got such a shock that she dropped the plate and it fell to the floor and shattered. She was terrified. She didn't think the lion was with my father. She thought the lion was sneaking up on him. It took a few seconds for my dad to explain. And then his father came down the stairs. "Don't move, son. There's a lion behind you," he said, and he went to get his gun. He was a farmer and he had a hunting rifle. "Dad, stop," my father explained. The lion was a pet, a friendly animal, not a beast there to hunt. Before too long, they were all petting and stroking this lion. And then my father had another fabulous idea. He would take the lion to school. He set off, walking along the lane, and before too long, he could hear the sound of the school playground. Children shouting and singing, doing clapping songs, kicking footballs, parents and pupils getting ready for the school day. But as he walked in to the playground, silence fell and everybody backed up to the wall and all colour drained from their face. Never before had they seen anything quite so terrifying as this boy leading a lion into the middle of the playground. "Who wants to meet my lion?" my father shouted. "I told you I wasn't making it up. I told you I was telling the truth." Before too long, all the children had gathered round and they were all stroking and petting Leo. Oh, my father was the hero of the day. And then the lion let out a huge roar that echoed around the playground and went up and through Mr. Grayson's office window. Well, he didn't think it was a lion. He thought it was a foolish child. A smile quivered at the edge of his mouth, and he got his cane from behind the desk and marched along the corridor, ready to punish the child who had dared scream and shout so loudly in the playground. "What sort of place do they think this is?" he thought to himself. He opened the playground door, stepped out into the cold, looked around the playground, saw a great big gang, a crowd of children in the middle of the playground. And then the children parted and Mr. Grayson saw it, the lion. Leo let out another huge roar, and Mr. Grayson let out a huge scream. "Mommy! Oh, Mommy!" he shouted, and he dropped his cane and ran across the playground, out of the gates, and he was never seen again. Well, later that day, my father discovered on the back of the collar a telephone number. And from the school office, because he didn't have a telephone at home, he called the number and discovered it was a travelling circus. And yes, they were in the nearby town. And yes, they had lost a lion. Yes, his name was Leo. And Leo was going to go home. That evening, the circus master arrived at my father's farm. He'd come with a local photographer who took a picture of my father with his arm around Leo. Click! In the newspaper it said, "Boy saves lion." And that's not all. The circus master gave my dad a reward. £10. Now, that might not sound like a lot of money to you, but in those days it was a small fortune. And my father knew exactly what he was going to buy with it. A brand new camera. And that is the end of my father's lion.